Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Iceman and Shadowcat for Marvel Crisis Protocol. As you can see, the first thing I've done is sprayed them with some matte white spray from Colourforge. I'm going to start with Shadowcat and I'm going to put some Abaddon black in the areas that will be black. This is basically her sleeves and her legs. This will be followed by a wash with some Nuln oil. Then I'm going to use some Arkellian green to paint Iceman. Now this is a contrast paint, so you don't need much of it. And I'm going to spread it as thin as I can because I don't want it to be too dark in any areas or any of the recesses. While Iceman dries, I'm going to go back to Kitty Pryde and I'm going to use some Corvus black to start highlighting all of the black areas. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Corvus black and Eshin grey. And then a final highlight of Eshin grey just by itself. Then I'm going to use some Yenden yellow to paint the rest of her outfit. And while that dries, I'm going to move back to Iceman. And for him, I'm going to create a 50-50 mix of Arkellian green and matte white for the first dry brush. And this is going to be quite a heavy dry brush as I want to cover most of this model with this colour. After that, I'll use the same mix, but round about a 80-20 ratio in favour of matte white. And this time it'll be a little bit of a lighter dry brush, mostly focused on the sort of outer edges. Then a final highlight of matte white just by itself for basically all the ends and the tips and the sort of bits that really stick out the most. This is also a very light dry brush. I don't want to sort of overpower the rest of the model with matte white. With Iceman out of the way, I'm now going to move back to Shadowcat and I'll start painting her yellow with some Flash Kits yellow, making sure I avoid any recesses as I want to keep that shading. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Flash Kits yellow and matte white for the first set of highlights. And for the second, I'm going to use Dawn yellow. Next, I'm going to move on to Lockheed and I'm going to paint him with Barak Nur Burgundy. And for the lower half of the Sentinel arm, I'm going to use some Nagaroth Night. I'll then give both these areas a wash with some Druchii Violet. And while that wash dries, I'm going to start on the rest of the arm, and for that I'm going to use some Cantor Blue. And this will get washed with some Draconoff Nightshade. Once the washes has dried, I then went back and relayered the Barak Nur Burgundy, avoiding all of the recesses. This was followed by a 50-50 mix of Barak Nur Burgundy and matte white for the first highlight. And for the second, it was the same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio, and this was mostly concentrating on just the wings. I then moved on to the purple and did a 50-50 mix of Xerus Purple and Iron Hand Steel for the first highlight of the purple section of the Sentinel's arm. And then finished that off with the same mix but at a 70-30 ratio. I then moved on to the Cantor Blue and used a 50-50 mix of Iron Hand Steel and Cantor Blue. And then once again added some more Iron Hand Steel to the mix for a 70-30 ratio for the final highlight. Then the rest of the sections of the Sentinel arm were painted with some Iron Hand Steel. Then all that Iron Hand Steel was given a wash with some Nuln oil. After that I used some Mephiston Red to paint the X-Men logo on Shadowcat's belt. I then very carefully gave it a highlight with some Evil Sun Scarlet. Then finally I very carefully painted the outer edge and the X with some Abaddon black. Next I painted her face with some Cadian Flesh Tone, which I then washed with some Reikland Flesh Shade. And once that wash had dried, I then painted her eyes, starting with some Abaddon black, followed by some matte white, And then finally a pattern black again for the pupils. And then relayered her skin with some Cadian flesh tone, avoiding the recesses. And this was followed by a 50-50 mix of Cadian flesh tone and Kislev flesh. And then finally Kislev flesh just by itself. And then use some Catachan flesh to paint her hair, which I then washed with some Agrax Earthshade. It's finally time to move on to the base, and for the concrete I used some Dawnstone, which is then edge highlighted with some grey Sear. And if, like me, you've got any metal areas on the base, I used some Iron Hand Steel. I then painted the rims with Abaddon Black, and then washed the entire base with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. Once that wash has dried, I'm going to give Iceman, and just Iceman, not his base, a once over with some gloss varnish. You can skip this step if you like, but for me it's going to give him an extra shine that's going to make him look more like ice. Once that wash, all that varnish have dried, that's these guys complete. An absolute blast painting these, really love them, absolutely superb models. I think Iceman is probably one of the fastest models I've ever painted, because it's literally just all dry brushing, but I think the model looks fantastic and I'm really happy that I gave him that extra shine. In total, they only took around about 4 hours to complete for the pair, and that's basically down to Iceman being pretty much nothing more than a quick dry brush. As I said, I really had a good time painting these models. I think they're absolutely fantastic. They're two of my favourite characters from the X-Men. If you follow this guide, I really do hope you found it useful. And why not give the rest of the channel a peruse, then maybe subscribe, a thumbs up, and, well, I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much again, and goodbye for now.